All right, we're here with two young pastors and an old pastor podcast. We need to name this thing.
I'd be one of the young pastors.
We're going through Sermon on the Mount on the weekends here at Grace, and so we just wanted a place to kind of just flesh out some of the... I know sometimes you can be sitting in the room and be like, but what about... You know, and you kind of have those, like you get the general concept of what Jesus is teaching, some application, but it's like, I want to flesh out some certain things. So we're going through, and we've kind of been cruising through a section where Jesus is just pushing all the buttons, you know, talking about hate, talking about lust, talking about the promises we make, and then he gets into what we kind of walked through over Easter, about turning the other cheek and about loving your enemies. It's kind of what we covered over the Easter weekend. And Dan, you shared some stuff on Good Friday that I'm sitting there playing music. I'm like, man, I never thought about that. Mm-hmm. And I'd love for you, so Jesus talks about loving your enemies in chapter 5. Can you kind of give us a quick couple minutes of what you kind of shared and how what Jesus is teaching, because there's always kind of the struggle, turn their cheek, but what about? And I thought the way that you kind of presented that on a different footing was powerful. Kind of give us the 30,000-foot view of what you kind of shared at Good Friday. I want to ask you a couple questions.
Yeah, I'd love to. First, turning the other cheek is me realizing you called me the old pastor, so I'm going to continue to do this podcast with you, okay? That's awesome. Yeah, we had a great weekend here, by the way. One of the things I want them all to know is I saw both of you guys in a suit coat and barely recognized you every Easter. Cool.
I would like to know, the inside of Ethan's suit coat was like a shiny sequin, like he was Willy Wonka under there.
Yeah. Apparently, I got so many comments on it. I'm like, man, apparently I do not dress nicely at all.
Yeah, I think this Sermon on the Mount has been just awesome. Jesus kind of goes after some stuff that's kind of, you really got to let it kind of sink in. What we said that Friday night, Good Friday night, there's several things he's talking about in this particular section. So there's this idea of how to respond to people when you kind of have somebody come at you in a certain way. So what he says is if they ask for your coat, I want you to give it to them. If they ask you to go 1 mile, go 2 with them. But one of the things he says, I think it's confused because a lot of people think, oh man, he's saying this, and they generalize it, is just turn the other cheek. And what can happen in the Bible is we can read the Bible sometimes and not try to get in the first century audience, and we lose sight of maybe the context. So I think what's going on there, and this is not original to me, I did a lot of reading and studying on it, it was like fascinating, but in their culture they would have greeted each other with a kiss on the cheek. And the idea here was that he actually designates which cheek. So the idea was you would have slapped somebody with your right hand because that's how they would have done something that would have been clean. And I'd hit you on the right cheek. So it's like this backhanded slap instead of kissing you on the cheek. And what Jesus seems to be saying is, here's the response. When there's an insult, a verbal assault, maybe it's even a physical assault, he's saying, I don't want you to retaliate. Like, you get hit on the right cheek, don't punch them on the center nose. You know what I mean? Like that. Yeah. But it's also like, don't keep your right cheek there. I don't want you just to, like, roll over.
Yeah.
He says, turn the other cheek. And I think what's interesting there is, he says, I think what he's saying there is, I want you to offer the relationship on a different footing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tim Keller is one of the guys who wrote on this. He says, I want you to always approach the relationship on the ground of hope. I love that.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and so when you begin to look at it like that, it's like, okay, I'm not going to punch you in the nose. I'm also not going to just keep letting you nail me in the right cheek, but I'd love to offer the relationship on a different footing.
Because I think that's what people struggle with, especially when it's a hard relationship, is, so I'm just supposed to just lay down and just keep getting hit in the cheek. You know what I mean? Like, if you slap me, keep slapping me. Versus when you said the different level. So how would you say that plays out practically? You talked about it a little bit Good Friday, but because people listen to this all kinds of different situations. There's just people that are hard. Then there's everything from abusive situations to betrayal to deep hurt to enemies of all kinds, or those situations where you have to kind of endure that, figure that out. How does that maybe play out practically, that different footing type of language? And then, if there's situations you think of as well, Ethan, on what that might look like tangibly.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could run all kinds of scenarios probably, right? I shared one Good Friday that, I don't know, just stuck out to me. It was one that in what I was reading from Tim Keller, he shared, a gal who was talking to her father on the telephone. He was verbally abusive to her and her mother. Her mother happened to be with her, and she was saying, Dad, you need to know you can't talk to us that way. You can no longer talk to us that way, and so I'm going to hang the phone up. Like, I'm hanging the phone up. But, Daddy, I love you. I'm going to call you again tomorrow. What she was doing was turning the other cheek. She's like, this can't continue.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not going to just sit here and just keep taking this.
Yeah.
So we're going to hang up. But I'm going to call you again tomorrow because I love you, and I want to approach this relationship with a posture of hope. And so there's a sense to which boundaries. I'm not going to enable you to continue to slug us verbally, but I'm going to approach you with hope and forgiveness. And I think that illustration kind of, now you could play that out a gazillion different ways, right? But I think that illustration kind of captures, I think, what he's saying here. Yeah. There's a boundary. I'm not going to keep doing that, but I want to approach this with hope.
It's almost like an intentionalness to, like, I think of turning the other cheek, and it almost feels passive, and you're like, I'm just going to let them hit me again, or whatever the case, but it's actually like she made the move to go, I'm going to initiate this again. Like, we're going to offer it with hope, elevate the relationship, not just react, but intentionally respond to something.
And that takes like a humble strength. You know what I mean? To be able to, I was listening to something, he was talking about the content versus like the system. And there's certain, I think that's what Jesus is doing. He's getting to the heart, is the content is don't kill, don't lust, but he's getting to like the system to where we're going to keep, you get in patterns where like, I'm passive aggressive, and you kind of stay in the same situation for years. And what this guy was talking about in this content and process was he's talking about his kid playing soccer. His kid plays soccer, and the kid, one of the other kids stopped passing the ball, and so he stopped passing the ball. And so they stopped, and it was changing the whole team dynamics. It was almost like two teams, and his kid was getting really mad at the other kid. And his dad's like, he didn't know what to do, and his dad's like, he could address it on a passing ball level, but he's like, we have to affect the system at the heart level. It's what Jesus is doing. And he's like, I want you next game to pass to that kid 6 times. He's like, what? He hasn't passed me the ball. And he's like, I want you to pass it 6 times. So sure enough, the kid passed the ball, that kid passed back. Well, now the system's broken, but it took him, instead of kind of turning the other cheek in that situation. I think there's something that Jesus is teaching that is, this turning the other cheek isn't a lay down and just let him walk, but it's, from a place of strength. Yeah. Kind of breaks that cycle, which takes power, humility, and strength in a humble way.
But think about the I don't know the word you just used, proactiveness of what Jesus is teaching here.
Yeah.
Like when somebody, let's say they verbally assault you, to keep the other cheek there is just like, I just absorb it. I must be a loser. I must be whatever. To turn the other cheek is to recognize, because it would have been an act of, you're a dog, you have no worth, is to say, no, I know my worth. Yeah. And then to me not punch you in the nose is, I know your worth. Wow. So I'm going to turn the other cheek. It's this position of, I know who I am in Christ. It's this position of, I'm going to not just passively absorb what you said about me, and then I'm not going to embrace something that's going to retaliate, but I'm going to offer the relationship. So I do think there's a strength to this that's powerful that Jesus taught. It's like brilliant. Like we've said this all along, right? Jesus is brilliant, right? This is incredible to think about. Yeah.
What would you say? And with this, there's that plays out a lot of relational ways, right? And sometimes maybe it's our personal lives, the public sphere. Sometimes there's things that you're like, turning their cheek feels like almost dangerous, because what if I lose this? What if we lose this? What if this is an important matter at hand, and turning the other cheek could risk the other team thinking they're winning, or they have the upper hand, or that person, if I turn the other cheek, they'll think that the way that they were treating me was fine. And so sometimes I think it can be a control thing. What would you say is there kind of how do you navigate maybe that reality of turning the cheek with also kind of standing on conviction or having conviction in certain ways? Like, what does that dynamic maybe look like?
Well, I mean, I'd be curious what you guys would say. The first thing that comes to my mind when you say that is, where I think it's easy to get off track, is when we talk about standing up for our convictions, we can tend to disassociate that from the relational idea that we're following Jesus. We're worshiping, loving. And the minute we do that, it becomes almost self-serving.
Yeah.
And so then what I do is I want to be right. I want to win. Yeah. And so I'm not going to turn the other cheek because I got to stand for my convictions. When the one Jesus was the example of this. Mm-hmm. He never waffled on sin. He never waffled on conviction. And he always loved people. And so he's the one I'm following.
Yeah.
So if my standing for my convictions doesn't look like him, then I'm kidding myself. My standing up for my convictions probably is disassociated from following him, from being devoted to Jesus, is what I would say. I think certainly Jesus never, ever once waffled on sin. Sermon on the Mount, case in point. I mean, it's like, that's not the point. But I think what Jesus showed us was that you can love people and be gracious to people and still be somebody who lives and stands for truth and stands for conviction. I think Jesus is an example of that.
Yeah.
So when we disassociate it from that, I'm going to stand up for my Christian convictions, but it's not connected to Christ. We're going to end up standing up for our convictions in a way that doesn't look like Jesus.
Yeah.
Is what's going to happen.
Yeah. I didn't think, this is half-baked right now, so I'm going to try and bake it as we talk about it.
It's a podcast, man. We are in the kitchen.
But, I just think of the gospel itself, the climax of the cross. You're like, Jesus died over convictions that he knew were right, and then it resurrected into something beautiful. It's not like those convictions were dead. You know what I mean? It's not like they gave him up or anything like that. But it was like he laid them down intentionally. It died, that thing, and then all of a sudden it resurrects into something beautiful that's true and good. And,
almost the letting because sometimes you're having a conversation with someone, we feel the need to I need to let you know what the truth is, or I need to let you know and that might be your opinion, my opinion, which I'm not saying isn't important or biblical, kind of thing. There's almost maybe that breaking of the cycle, the turning of the cheek is maybe it's something as simple as a question, like, well, I think this, well, I think this, well, I think this. Hey, why do you think that? It maybe breaks that cycle. Maybe it goes from the content to the system of if the system is just us giving our stances versus help me understand something you always say. Ask them a question. Oh, I understand where you're coming from. Well, all of a sudden, it might feel like a death because I surrendered, but really might offer a resurrection where the person, well, why do you think that? Well, now what comes to life is an actual conversation It's good. Ethan preaching. Yeah. This is good. Hopefully this is helpful to you, and we kind of want to continue dialogue through Sermon on the Mount. I'll say this. If there's questions as we go through Sermon on the Mount that you're like, man, what about this, Dan, Jesus says? Email it in, norton@gracechurches.org. I think that's it. If not, just email dgregory@graceohio.org and we'll get it where it needs to go.